"I'm a famous prostitute," she said, her voice raspy, trembling, but carrying a strange mix of defiance and sorrow. She stood barefoot on the cracked road outside the saloon, bruises blooming purple along her cheek and arms. The moon cast a pale light over her, outlining her figure against the dusty horizon of Abilene, Texas. The night was quiet except for the distant whistle of a train, a reminder that life kept moving, whether people fell behind or not. The man who had stopped in his tracks was Ethan Cole, a cowboy known across several towns for his steady hand and calm heart. His boots were worn, his hat tilted low, but his eyes were sharp, the kind that could measure a man or a woman without speaking a word. He had seen her stumble out of the saloon, not like the women who usually worked there, laughing and leaning on men for a living, but like someone escaping a storm that had nearly drowned her. Her words struck him like a bullet, not because of what she called herself, but because of how firmly she seemed to believe that was all she could ever be. "I'm a famous prostitute," she repeated, clutching her torn shawl tighter, daring him to laugh, to sneer, to confirm the label she had worn like chains for too long. But Ethan didn't sneer. Instead, he slowly removed his hat, knelt down on one knee in front of her, and looked up at her face with a quiet steadiness. "You ain't what they call you," he said, his voice low but steady. "You're someone more than this. You're worth more than the names they give you." She froze, stunned by the unexpected gentleness. For years, she had only known two kinds of men, the ones who used her and the ones who judged her. This cowboy didn't seem to belong to either group. Her name was Clara. She had been born in a small farmhouse in Kansas, the daughter of a preacher who believed the world could be saved one soul at a time. But life had other plans. After her mother died in childbirth, Clara was left to care for her younger siblings while her father struggled to keep food on the table. By the time she turned 16, a traveling showman promised her work in the city. Dancing, he said, maybe even singing. She followed him, desperate for freedom, only to discover that the work wasn't on a stage, but in dim back rooms with locked doors. Clara had tried to run many times, but poverty clung to her like a shadow. By the time she arrived in Texas, she was known in more than one town as a woman whose beauty could silence a room. Men paid, women whispered, and Clara carried her reputation like a scar she could never heal. But that night, something had gone too far. A drunken gambler had struck her when she refused to follow him upstairs, leaving her cheeks swollen and her dignity in tatters. She had fled into the street, barefoot, desperate to breathe air that wasn't stained with whiskey and regret. That was when she met Ethan. Ethan rose slowly, still holding her gaze. "You're hurt," he said simply. Clara laughed bitterly. "A hurt cowboy, I've been hurt my whole life. What you see is just the latest bruise." Ethan tilted his head, his eyes narrowing in thought. He wasn't a preacher, wasn't a savior, but he knew resilience when he saw it. This woman, despite everything, still stood tall, still spoke with fire. She wasn't broken, not completely. "Come with me," he said finally. She blinked, startled. "And go where? Back to some ranch where your wife will spit at me? Back to a church where they'll pray my sins out of me? I've heard it all before. I don't need charity." Ethan shook his head. "Not charity, choice. Maybe for once you get to decide where your life goes." The words dug deep, pulling at something she thought long dead. Hope. She wanted to believe him, but the weight of her past pressed hard. "You don't know me," she whispered. "I know enough," he replied. "I know you're more than what they see." The silence between them stretched as the wind rustled through the empty street. Clara felt the sting of tears, but she blinked them back. She had sworn never to cry again in front of a man. Yet here she was, standing barefoot and bruised, trembling not from fear, but from the possibility of being seen. Ethan led her to his horse, a strong chestnut mare tied outside the saloon. He offered his hand, and after a long hesitation, she placed her own in his. His hand was rough, calloused from years of ranch work, but steady. For the first time in years, she felt like she wouldn't fall. The ride to his ranch was silent. Clara clung to the saddle, her mind a storm of questions. Why was this cowboy helping her? What did he want in return? She had learned long ago that nothing came free. But when they arrived at the ranch, Ethan didn't touch her, didn't ask for anything. He simply led her inside, offered her a clean blanket, and said, "Rest. Tomorrow, you'll see things different." Clara lay awake most of the night, listening to the creak of the wooden beams and the soft whinny of horses outside. She wasn't used to quiet. Usually nights were filled with laughter, music, shouting, doors slamming, coins dropping into a tin. But here, silence felt like healing. The next morning, she awoke to the smell of coffee and fresh bread. Ethan was already outside, working the land with steady precision. She watched him from the window, his figure moving against the rising sun. Something about his simplicity struck her. He didn't live by titles, didn't care for reputations. He worked, he provided, he endured. Over the days that followed, Clara began to find small pieces of herself she thought she had lost. She helped with the horses, brushed their coats, and even laughed when one of the colts nuzzled her shoulder. The bruises on her face slowly faded, but the deeper scars still lingered. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of red and gold, Clara finally spoke. "Do you believe people can change, Cowboy?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. He took a sip of his coffee, set the cup down, and looked at her with quiet seriousness. "I believe people can be more than what the world says they are. Change. That's just another word for fighting back." Clara's chest tightened. For years, she had let the world define her. But here, with this man who asked for nothing but honesty, she felt something shift. She wasn't sure if it was redemption or just a dream, but it was something. In town, whispers spread quickly. Folks had seen Clara ride away with Ethan, and tongues wagged with cruel speculation. But Ethan didn't care. When one rancher tried to mock him at the general store, Ethan met his words with silence so cold the man couldn't finish his sentence. People soon learned that whatever Ethan saw in Clara was something they had no right to question. Weeks passed, and Clara began to believe she could build a new life. She even wrote a letter to her younger brother back in Kansas, whom she hadn't seen in over a decade. For the first time, she told him the truth of her life. Not with shame, but with honesty, and she promised to return when she was ready. But one night, as storms rolled over the plains, the gambler who had struck her in the saloon came looking. He wanted what he thought was his, and he brought 2 men with him. They shouted at the ranch gate, demanding she be handed over. Clara froze, fear gripping her chest like iron chains. Ethan stepped outside, rifle in hand. His voice was calm but unyielding. "She don't belong to you." "She never did." The gambler sneered. "She's nothing but a Before he could finish, Ethan raised his rifle just enough to make his point. "Say it again," he warned, his eyes like steel. The gambler swallowed his words, realizing this cowboy wasn't bluffing. After a tense standoff, the men rode away into the storm, leaving Clara trembling on the porch. Ethan turned to her, his expression softening. "No one owns you, Clara, not them, not the past. You get to choose who you are." She broke then, tears falling freely as she collapsed into his arms. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe him. She wasn't a prisoner of her reputation anymore. Months later, the town saw Clara again, not in the saloon, not in the shadows, but walking proudly beside Ethan at the county fair. Her hair was tied back neatly, her dress plain but clean, her smile real. Some people still whispered, but many began to see her differently, not as a scandal, but as a woman who had fought her way back to dignity. Clara never forgot the night she stood barefoot and bruised in the street, declaring herself a famous prostitute. But she also never forgot the cowboy who knelt before her and reminded her she was more. Because sometimes it takes one person's belief to rewrite another's story. And in that small Texas town, Clara's story became one not of shame, but of survival, courage, and the quiet power of being seen.